Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning. First of all, I would like the Faculty of Modern Languages and Communication, Universiti Putra Malaysia, would like to thank Dr. Jin Kirshner, basically the president of Release Education Project. Thank you for willing to share your experience and knowledge on the reporting qualitative results. The Faculty of Modern Languages and Communication, Universiti Putra Malaysia, very honored and would like to welcome you to our talk series. Basically, I'm the Deputy Dean of Graduate Studies and Internationalization in Universiti Putra Malaysia. We are very feel blessed at this early morning Malaysian time to have you with us to share a bit of your experience, especially on the qualitative research methods. So before, without further ado, I would like to hand over this session to Dr. Vahid, who also I would like to thank him for initiate this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Salam, morning, hi, and evening to you, Jean. Thank you very much. Dear Dr. Siti, you have been very supportive. Thank you. And thanks to dear Jean for having accepted to share. And thanks to our participants. Thank you very much. I'm repeating, please feel free to keep your webcams on to give us a classroom feeling. Then it will be much better. Yeah, it's really great seeing all these faces. Yeah, this is more natural now. Okay, so this is Jean. She holds a PhD in education and human resource development. She specializes in literacy and teacher education. I got to know about Jean when she submitted a paper to my journal, and her paper was special because there was the name of a country in her paper I'd never heard of. It was Belize. So her name sort of stuck in my mind, and I couldn't let go because of that word, Belize. But then I was more interested, and I started reading her paper, and the paper was interesting. It was, I'll leave it to her if she wants to talk about it in more length, but it was the case of Corona in the case of lockdown in this country called Belize, and they didn't have enough resources to be able to run online classes for their students. So what they did instead was really interesting. If you're interested in knowing what they did, you can read the paper. So I'll stop talking and leave it to you, Jean. By the way, we are recording this. We will be sharing this. Thanks to Jean for having accepted that. I'll go mute. Thank you.
Hi, and very good morning to everybody. I don't know if you realize, but it's Sunday night for me. So you guys are ahead of me on your Monday morning. And I'm just delighted to be here with so many good thinkers and people who are looking for ways to understand our world better, to ways to understand our learning better, our human condition better. What an honor to spend this Sunday evening and Monday morning with minds like that. I want to talk about qualitative research today because it's very exciting to me. It's, I think, a way for us to understand our humanity in a really special and unique way. And I love quantitative, and I'm happy to produce a graph as the next person and to quantify understandings of our world also. But qualitative to me holds my heart because it allows us to tell the story of our experience as humans. and I love that. I started this Belize Education Project, which is sort of my passion, is understanding the teachers and the educators of this tiny country with few resources. And I was inspired by these educators who lifted their chins and their eyes to the future through the children in their classroom. And despite tremendous resource challenges and challenges accessing formal education themselves, they were resilient. And I wanted that story to be told. And so that's actually where a lot of my experience in qualitative research comes from. I am currently have a book contract with Routledge Publishing in England to share some of that. And of course, what I had sent the journal was what they did, I think, in the face of coronavirus. And again, did not despair and did not, fall to their knees, or if they did, which maybe they did, they stood up, dusted their knees off, and went forth. And so to tell that story, which is what I've done in the journal, and to tell the story that I'm writing in my book right now, my choice and my approach, besides being participatory action research, is qualitative. And in that, I have chosen to do a narrative approach. And I kind of want to share with you why I've done that and what that looks like. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see if we can get to that so we can kind of look at, can everybody see the slide? Am I sharing my screen? Can you guys see what? A thumbs up, that's what I tell people. Actually, in addition to being a qualitative researcher and doing professional development, I think that it's an important part of my story that I also wear another hat, and that I teach young children. First graders is in the United States, a 6 and 7-year-olds to read. So I always feel like I have one foot in the classroom so that I keep my head in the game. That's what we say in the United States. And when I'm writing about teachers, that I know what they're going through, that I know what that experience is, because I think that's really important. So I want to talk about, again, qualitative data. And my theme today is that good data tells a story. It's the human story. And I think that's important to remember, that whatever knowledge we have, we organize it. Let's see if I can get it to, we organize our experiences in this way through a narrative. And Jerome Bruner is one of my favorites. He writes so much about qualitative research and organizing our understandings through a story, through a narrative. And you've done all these interviews. I've read some of the papers that some of you guys have written, and you have loads and loads of tape recordings of 2-hour interviews and transcriptions and focus groups and field notes. But what's the story, and what do you do with it? And by the way, if somebody has a question, I'm not monitoring the chat. So if somebody would let me know that there is a question, or if you want to unmute yourself and just hand it to me, I would love to answer it, or I'll stop every once in a while and pause. That Americans are teased a lot for talking very fast without taking a breath. So that's probably partly what this presentation will do. But I want to talk about when you start a piece of qualitative research, when you're writing it, to share your data, to share your insights, to share the literature that's out there, and to share what is compelling about your data. And what I often say is, you're wanting to get somebody on the train with you. Maybe it's not a hot mess express, but I thought that was funny. But it's something compelling. And your reader needs to get on the train with you. And the reader is going to ask, why do I want to travel this journey with you? What have you got for me? And my answer to you is, what you guys have is a lot. You have the whole human experience, that we are connected, that we share so much, that your reader's going to want to travel with you. And you're going to want to begin in your own words, not necessarily a scholar's words, because you have lots of time in your writing up about what you're doing to bring in scholars and support your work with scholars. But when you start, you want people to travel with you. So you need to start with your own words and your own thesis and identify what a common human dilemma might be. And if you're writing about English as a second language and becoming proficient, the dilemma is the connection and the relevance in the conversation. That's the dilemma about acquiring English proficiency for students. A common passion and hope and fear. Those are it. And then find that tiny moment that manifests it. What about the time that my teachers and I realized that we were equal in our positionality? It was a moment that happened. What about when somebody doesn't have adequate English proficiency and how that's so painful, a tiny moment? Or when they did have it, that moment of triumph when it worked. Start there, because that's what this is about. Then you can get to your data. Some of my favorites that I like to bring in, some qualitative researchers who have just, they've sparked my passion for qualitative research. And not just mine, they've won awards and awards and awards. And so the first one I think of is Ruth Behar, and she went and did a lot of research on some Mexican women and their life stories. And similar to me, she was inspired by their resilience and what came up. And so she starts like this. She starts in the kitchen with mint green walls and the dark pink cracked cement floor tiles. Two women sat talking across from one another with a tape recorder before them. And there was a plate of cookies and pop bottles and several plastic containers between them. And in this stillness, in this night, it's a story. It's really about two storytellers speaking with one another. Now, that's a tiny moment. You also already know that Behar is going to talk to us about the story of people's lives and how that impacts them. You already know that. And that's what she starts with. Later, she brings in data, and later she brings in literature. But this is a good start. Now, I also want to talk about Renato Rosaldo, who's also just compelled me to talk about culture and truth. And he also has received so many awards for his qualitative research and writing up of it. Now, his story goes to the Philippines, and you can see from his writing, wow, and what he sees is, well, I'll read it because I just think his introduction is incredible. If you were to ask an older England man or northern Luzon, Philippines, why he cuts off human heads, his answer is brief, and one on which no anthropologist can readily elaborate. He says that rage born out of grief impels him to kill his fellow human beings. He claims he needs a place to carry his anger. The act of severing and tossing away the victim's head enables him to vent, and he hopes throw away the anger of his bereavement. Well, Renato Rosaldo uses this to talk about cultural differences and how we manage human dilemmas and human experiences such as grief, and wraps that into his own experience with losing his wife, and then goes on to be a tremendous anthropologist explaining these acts of culture and truth. But wow, I read that and I'm on the train with him. And I'm ready to go. So let's look what I'm thinking of. One of the things I want to talk about is that no matter what your data is, there is some human dilemma that's common to everybody who reads this. It's us, it's you, it's other scholars, it's students, it's your professors who will be reading this, it's everybody. And I just took some examples. So these are not obviously exhaustive. I just thought reading some of what you've written and thought about what are sort of the human issues and dilemmas with these subjects that you're writing about. So like I said a minute or two ago, if you're writing about English proficiency, then you're really writing about a global and a human connection. You're really writing about the human theme of being relevant in a global conversation. And if you're writing about socioeconomic policy, you're really writing about the quality of the human experience and how resources might impact that or not. You're really writing about issues of social justice, from marginalized communities to communities that have resources and have status, and the justice of that. And the socioeconomic policy is a manifestation of social justice or lack of social justice. And so if you're writing about that, go deep and find what is that human experience that's common. And same with, I write a lot about decolonizing professional development. That's mine. And the theme is enhancing global literacy for the future stewards of our civilization. The theme is also involving increased involvement of marginalized communities. Yeah, decolonizing professional development is a great vehicle. And I'm going to write a lot of data and a lot of results about ways that I can show that you can increase decolonizing strategies for professional development. But what's the human part of that? Why do I even want that? And those, by the way, are far away human dilemmas. And so I'll talk to you in a little bit about making those a little bit more real, breathing some life into them. So here's an example that I got of an introduction to a piece of qualitative research. Let's see if I can. Your faces are in the middle of the screen, so I have to read it on my phone here. It says, developing thinking skills has emerged as a fundamental pursuit in school curricula in general. And then the source is given. And teaching English as a second foreign language in particular. The research attention to thinking skills as a route to improve second language acquisition and sustain its development in learners began in the 1980s. With the marked shift from structural linguistics and behavioral psychology to cognitive skills. That is good data, great literature. But that's the first sentence in this qualitative piece. And I'm not sure what the thesis is or what's the human dilemma. And there's so much human dilemma. There's so much in thinking about thinking skills. There's so much for the human develop. There's so much to say about the human passion or hope of developing thinking skills. Because isn't that where we're going? If we're developing thinking skills, aren't we raising a civilization that can wrestle with the challenges of democracy? Aren't we talking about the ability to wrestle with common challenges that come up in our lives? And the second language, isn't that also giving us a great tool so that we can do it? There's so much to get people on the train. And then let's start with a tiny snippet, a small moment, or an example of somebody that's struggling with thinking skills and why that's a problem. I mean, you've done your 2-hour interviews with a lot of people. Somebody somewhere gave you an example of where it was alive, either the lack of thinking skills, the lack of a second language, or the triumph of what it meant to have having thinking skills in place and to be proficient in English. So I think that's important to realize. What's your thesis? What's the human dilemma? What's the human hope or passion? And then what's the small moment or an example that can bring this to life? So I want you to think about your own qualitative research if you're working on a piece right now, or one that you might have in mind that you would like to work on, or one that you have already written and turned in even. Maybe it was one you did a year ago. If you were to take any of those, what are the small moments from your data that illustrate those human themes? And I would like you to take a few moments to do some reflective writing. This is also a really good time if you have questions or comments. I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. This would be a good time also.
Great. Thank you, Jean. We are definitely on the train enjoying this. Okay. Do we have any questions? Anything to share so far? By the way, in our chat room, I have left a link for Jean's project, and also in case you're interested in donating, feel free to do that so, because you will be helping a few school children smile by doing so. And Jean, please keep us up to date on the donations. Let's see how much we have raised.
And yeah.
I hope we can raise $1 million today.
It's inspiring. This group of children don't have books. They don't have any access except for the books that we're able to provide them. So it is exciting to get more. Yeah.
Even the fact that they didn't have access to, you see, I can't get off your train of your paper. That's what a qualitative paper can do to you, because it tells a story, and stories are so powerful that you can't help forgetting them. That's the magic of qualitative research. Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
That's how that, I believe, is how we come to understand our world, is through stories. Even if it's numerical, it's a story. And it's how we're moved. It's how we're moved. And it's how we come to understand our own lives and the meaning that our own lives carry. It's with the story.
So yeah, well, I'm reading the chat room. No questions so far. Thank you, Dr.
All right,
Ruthie.
then I'll go back to sharing the screen then. All right, so once you have people on your train, I like to think of your writing as a rubber band. So they're on the train. And I think it's important for us as we process stories that we stretch from big to small, from small to big, from small to big, and then back. Or another way to say it more formally, maybe, is from the particular to the general, from the particular to the general. Because we know as human beings that we experience tiny moments in our lives, and so do the people that we interview. But those moments represent something bigger. Something that comes to mind a lot, for an example for me, was as I was working on decolonizing strategies for my participants, my colleagues in Belize, we really struggled with positionality, that I was a woman from, well, white woman from the United States with a PhD and stuff. And there was this unequal assumption based on what, 1,000 years or more of colonization. And I was a descendant from the colonizers, and they were a descendant from the colonized. And so you can't shake 750 years of history in a month, but I really felt like it was important to disrupt it. Well, so there was this time when they had come up to the United States and they were in my classroom of kids. And one of my little boys, Colton, was really struggling behaviorally, was being diagnosed with, here in the United States, I think we call it obsessive defiance compulsion, something like that, a big label. So he's throwing whiteboards and he is screaming curse words. And in my classroom, I have my Belizean colleague who is watching me be an expert teacher as whiteboards are being thrown. I have a school psychologist, a behavior specialist. I mean, you name it. There were adults with clipboards scratching their heads and whiteboards were flying. And the moment ended. And afterwards, Yvette, the teacher, and I cried together because it was horrible. I mean, teachers don't want their kids unsafe. They don't want to not be able to reach their learners. There was nothing we did. And the day ended like that. Well, that was just a little moment. It was just a tiny little moment. I mean, it lasted 10 minutes. And then maybe we cried another 15 minutes and then we talked about it some more. But in that moment, something bigger happened. Who knew what and who held what knowledge was turned up on its head. This assumption that this American teacher had ideas and that she could manage it was gone. And this assumption that this teacher from Belize, who had come with less resources, would be any more or less effective than me trying to reach this kid, it was over in that moment. And maybe not over. I mean, colonization's a big thing. But I will tell you this, it was disrupted in that moment. And we will never go back to before that moment. And so that was a very tiny piece of data from a field notes. Later, I interviewed her, and there's some more data in her beautiful explaining to me what she came to understand in that moment, what I came to understand in that moment. That's a tiny moment. And it's about Colton and Yvette and me. That's the small. But it's also about disrupting assumptions of colonization that have gone on for 750 years. That's a big. So from small to big to small to big, that's what a qualitative researcher and writer becomes really good at. I want to talk a little bit about some of my own interviews. And I also, when I talk about these grand things of decolonizing, I do note that I have to support it with research, that there are scholars who have written a tremendous amount about decolonizing. I mean, that's for mine, or scholars that have written about English as a language, as a second language. So drawing on that brilliance that has come before us, but also tying it in with the brilliance that you have in your own small moments and in your research. So William is an incredible teacher in Belize, and he's writing about, and I'm writing in my qualitative piece about the human experience of coming to trust each other, developing relationships. And when you come to trust each other and develop relationships, how that can catapult your work as a community. So Wenger, of course, he's one of my people that I love, writes about communities of practice and how that can come to be when communities and people, especially cross-cultural, people from cross-cultural communities can come to work together, and first of all, trust. So William in an interview says, I think trust is developed by time and the quality of the time that you spend with each other. I got the opportunity to go to Colorado. I stayed at Miss Sherry's house. I got to know her more. I started asking questions. I started to investigate. I started to explore more. So trust was gained with time and spent in talking about our passion, which is education, which is our children, which is books to help them. So there's William. Then Wenger writes in his book, practice resides in a community of people and the relations of mutual engagement by which they can do whatever they do. So Wenger and William are one. So I've gone from my close, my particular, right up close in front of me, to far, where Wenger is whispering in my ear exactly what William is telling me. Close, far, close, far. So I have Wenger, he's my far, and I go back, this time to Thureen, principal that I worked with, and this was a focus group that I conducted, and she says, we do not look at each other like we are from different schools. We are one people working from our common good for our community, for our children, so that they can grow up to be better people. BP, Disabilities Education Project, has helped us and has modeled for us, helped us even by giving scholarships to people. That's where you guys come in. We have come to trust each other. So Thureen comes right back up and validates what Wenger wrote about in 2002. Close, far, close, far. And now, yeah.
I have a question. Can you go back to your previous slide?
Yes, I can.
What you're saying here, I mean, what you're showing here is that William personal communication. Does that mean his own journal, his own reflexive notes? Is that it? Okay, so does that mean that we can include our own personal experience into our own thesis writing or our own report? And that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and so this is a personal interview. And so personal communication is what APA considers something where you will not be able to access it because it's not online. Now, I have that transcriptions of it when I got my IRB approval, and I have the recordings of it and transcriptions of it. And there are some people that also have access to that. My advisor when I was getting my PhD would have access to that. So there are some people, and just basically went with what the IRB says that you can do with that. They are pseudonyms, by the way, so that I keep the privacy. And before I interviewed them, let alone write it up, this is a good question. I got IRB approval, and before they were interviewed, they signed a lot. There was a lot to explain. That anytime they wanted, they could take their name out, even though it was a pseudonym, that I would be using a pseudonym, even though a lot of them actually wanted their names to be included. IRB said, no, I can't, even if they wanted to have their own names included. And that they were signing understanding that I was using it for research and who would be reading it and so on. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Then I want to talk about triangulation. It's sometimes a confusing term of putting a lot of data together from different sources and different voices so that you are coming up with a theme that's coming from more than one person. And so in this one, I have the theme that I'm going for in this piece that's in my book is I am writing about the fact that we changed each other, that they changed me and I changed them, and that our identities were changed. And of course, I write a lot in the book that when your identity is changed, of course, so is your practice, that they're all woven together. So in this particular case, in this section, I am wanting to show that there's a lot of voices that have said the same thing, and they're coming from different dates, they're coming from different people, but they're saying the same thing. In your growth, I can see that you appreciate us for who we are, or I have changed you since you have come into our classroom. You have seen our struggles. You can identify with us. We have the same passions, the same struggles. We wanted the same things as a teacher, same experience, it has changed you. And then from still another person. This, by the way, is years of, you can kind of start seeing the years, there's years of research, years of data, because I've been doing this for 13 years. So I know from the first day that you made your step into Eden Primary School that you were transformed from that moment of seeing our children and our teachers. So it's all moving together, all of these same themes. I wanted to show you a little bit about the process of the interviews. I noticed when I was reading that you guys also, as you're doing qualitative research, do these 2-hour interviews that you've recorded, and you know, you may do your transcribing how you do it. I've gotten very fast at transcribing. I transcribe them myself. I know that there's other scholars that have somebody else pay them because it's tremendously tedious at times. I always do it myself. I always am surprised that I didn't remember huge parts of the conversation that are tremendously significant. Like, how did I not get that? There's 10 minutes of this 2-hour conversation that completely blew me out of the water when I was transcribing and I didn't even notice. So I think that's really important that for me, that I transcribe it. Once I've transcribed it, I go back and you can see that I have themes that I'm looking for. Agency, challenge to agency, positive education influences. And I go through and I highlight all the different themes. So that, to me, I often compare it to sort of making a quilt, that I am pulling these colors, or a tapestry or painting, that I'm pulling these colors, and some green goes here and some red goes there, because all of these themes work together to really make a beautiful portrait of who I've talked to and their tremendous life stories that inspire me. And then you can see, kind of going back to, can you use this, and the validity and trustworthiness of it. I put where in the tape it is, what minute it is, and I keep the lines there so that I can remember and go back. I also talk about the theme for myself, and also questions that I need to resolve and ask, and I have those always as for each one of my interviews. And so this is a time that I would, again, want to pause, see if there's some questions. I want you to reflect a little bit on your own interviews and field notes and focus groups, and what moments come to mind in your thinking that could breathe life into the story of your sharing. I'm going to unshare my screen here so that I can see you more, and see if there's some questions.
Thank you very much for doing this.
I have a question,
Okay.
a quick one. You have been giving and sharing with us the triangulation of interviews, to make sure that they all sort of say the same thing or they are aligned. Is there other forms of triangulation? Like I do remember there's such thing called content triangulation, there's methodology triangulations and things like that in a broader perspective. So it is not only interview as a triangulation, but there are other approaches to make sure that they all meet at the same point. Over to you. Just your comments, please.
Yes, I think interviews is powerful, as well as your field notes. But in addition to that, I also think what's very powerful is the literature that's out there. So there are people writing about what you're experiencing. And like I said earlier, on one side, your interviews are right in front of you, and constantly these scholars are whispering into my ear simultaneously. So even sometimes findings and discussions of your research really are interwoven, and should be, because they're all similar things. Sometimes even quantitative data. I mean, in my book, I really talk about while our identities shifted and our practices shifted, so did student learning, and that was the student outcomes are quantifiable. And so I think that what you're really looking for is you're looking for a sense of trustworthiness,
Right.
and that you need to have more than one source of knowledge, of perspectives and understandings of what you're coming to believe and what your thesis or at least your question is. And so a variety. I think that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Any comments? Intan? Intan? Oh, I guess those kids have some questions.
I love that. That makes me happy. I'm a teacher first, right?
Anani, go ahead. Anani?
So I have a question about the your data just now that you show us. You mentioned that you note there that there are questions for you to resolve, and are these questions for yourself that you needed to answer, or are these follow-up questions that you have for your participants?
About the questions that I have as I'm writing, or the questions that I ask my participants in the interviews?
If you see your previous slide just now, putting your voices, your data together for your story, for your
Yes.
point, and you mentioned that you highlighted name and questions, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the tables there, and I see a lot of questions that you put there. Would that be the questions that you are going to follow up with your participants, or are those just questions that you asked yourself during your reflexivity process? I would like to know the process that you go through there.
That's such a great, I did leave that just, you're right, I left that sort of out there. Those actually can look in, they can present in many different ways. Sometimes it's a follow-up question where I'll call the person that I was interviewing, or if I'm in the country, or if they're say, you know what, I've been thinking about this, tell me more about this. Sometimes it's a matter of going and looking for literature that delves more into what they were just talking about. And sometimes it's a matter of finding other data besides the literature that supports it. So if somebody says, you know, my family was a tremendous influence. My grandmother said I was going to be a teacher, and I believed her and I was going to be. Then I want to start seeing if that's a common theme in teachers and educators and beliefs, that their families were powerful in them making that decision, and start exploring more. So those questions can go anyway. It just means I need more information on that data. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, I'll go back to sharing this screen. So what we just kind of talked about was supporting your voices with literature. And so I've kind of been talking about a piece of my book about the relationships that changed us. So of course, Freire, you can't write about education and professional development, especially decolonizing professional development, without Paulo in there. And of course, his says it's impossible to teach without the courage to love. And then we go back to Wenger. The learning that is the most personally transformative turns out to be the learning that involves members of these communities of practice. Then Clandolin, who writes a lot about teacher relationships and research. As participants and researchers, lives meet in the midst of each of our unfolding complex multitude of experiences. We begin to shape time, space, spaces where we come together and negotiate ways of our being together and ways of giving accounts of our work together. And so those just so beautifully support the triangulation I had from the multitude of voices, and now I have the multitude of scholars, so that we're getting a lot. Similar to my interviews, when I am doing research, this is for the paper that I actually just did for the journal. This was just a snapshot of me pulling together literature to support it. Especially, by the way, I loved the peer review process of this particular paper, because that really pushed me, go back, go get more research. The peer review was beautiful in lifting my writing to be better, because that, I don't even know the gender, that particular peer reviewer pushed more research, more literature, come on, more's out there. There's a lot more in the world of people doing this, go back, which I appreciated. So this was pulling literature in all the time, that there was urgency with COVID, that crisis caused innovation, lots of literature to say that, and that digital options were problematic in our resource poor parts of our planet across the world, not just Belize. And so you can see that I'm putting this particular paper together, and you can see that how I am putting that literature together, again in themes. Again, I love to think of it in terms of creating this tapestry, where I'm going to be pulling the urgency that people are feeling, shutting down what 1.9 billion children walked away from school that third week of March, and the urgency of it, and the idea that so combining that with the teachers that I'm talking to that are really in despair, like the teachers all over the world were in despair about closing classrooms and stopping the instruction of all of our whole future of our world, stopped learning that week. There was despair. And so going back and forth between the literature saying that there was despair, and then going and interviewing particular teachers saying this is a problem, this is upsetting to me, really created a beautiful picture, a story of human dilemma, of human challenge. So you put it all together. That's what I'm hoping I'm doing. Now I'm skipping to my book. And this is about, no, this is the article, sorry, about the radio in Belize that they're using to reach their students. So we have Afni, who is a standard 6 teacher, explains his decision. So that's the close and that's the data. I wanted to try it so I can grow as a teacher, so I can learn more about this technology learning or distance learning, because we are uncertain how long this will take, because we are in this technology era. And then he spoke about his hope to impact his own community and his culture, and he continued, I became a teacher because I wanted to make a change in my community. So that's Afni on May 16th. And then we've got Kirshner from 1923 saying the same thing that Afni just said, a sense of a sense of hope that in a crisis, new creation is possible and old forms can be transcended. Now, I haven't talked about this except at the very beginning. When you're telling a story, you cannot just leave it with Afni. I can't just leave it with Convener. They're great. I use them. They're talking to me. But the train that my readers got on was my train. And so I need to wrap it up and put a bow on it. I need to say, this is what Afni said. This is what Convener said. And Kirshner was another teacher. I'm going to tell you that new ways of teaching and new ways of reaching students began to be imagined and then practiced. And that's the really critical part. It's so tempting, and I think it's because we don't take ourselves seriously enough. It's so tempting to just leave it. Well, that's what Afni said. That's what Paulo Freire said. So what do I have to add to that? I'll just leave it there and go on to the next paragraph. It's your story. It's yours. You have these people supporting you, but it's yours. Finish it. Take that final sentence and say, this is what that means. This is what Afni was saying. This is what Kirshner was saying. This is what Convener was saying. And this is what's the big deal. This is what's important. I think that's really critical. And I think the problem is that we don't take ourselves seriously enough. What do I have to add to Paulo Freire? A lot. You have a lot. So I want you to take yourself seriously when you're writing up your qualitative research and realize that it's your train that your reader's on. Which leads me to the big deal, right? That's the thing. And what is the big deal about it? You have your data, you have your scholars supporting you. So what? Why is your data such a big deal? Don't leave it to your reader to infer it. That's your job. It's a big deal that the teachers in Belize are using radio, because now they're reaching kids and they're also transforming who they are because their identity has changed into somebody that's innovative and competent. That's the big deal. In my book about decolonizing strategies, the big deal is that relationships have transformed me and my participants in this way. And because our relationships have transformed, we have become more effective educators, which means that kids are going to grow up to be democratic citizens in a way that we want. That's the big deal. So often, I think it's similar to what the slide before. We present this data, it's great, and we have scholars and we have numbers and we have good stuff. And I think we don't take ourselves seriously enough to say, okay, it's kind of a big deal, and this is why. So I think that's really important to remember that. So then we go back to my favorites, Ruth Behar, and I have to go on my phone to look at it because your faces are covering part of hers. I just love Ruth Behar. I just think she's amazing. So she concludes her book, has all this data about Esperanza and her life, and more than just what is that she's taking a story and she's sending it out to the world. And so she's questioning the whole point of qualitative research and wondering if that's even fair. So she's chapters by being willing to reveal more of herself to me than any other woman in Nimehchisalem, which is hers. It can be said that Esperanza was a traitor. That's her big deal. In telling me her historias, which is her word, because she's giving a nod to the Hispanic culture and to the Latinx piece that is important, so that I would put them in the book that would talk in the tongue of gringos. Esperanza placed herself in a paradoxical position. In the masked tongue of translation, she hopes she'll be invulnerable. But with the border between Mexico and the United States, like the border between life and death, being so permeable, can I keep guard over this book? So she ends with this human dilemma of keeping people's integrity intact. And then I love this, is the last line of her book, no doubt about it, this book is a talking serpent, too late to cut out its tongue now, to cut its tongue now. She ends not with the data, but with her questioning and her dilemma about what this data is going to do. That's the point of her book. That's not the point of all of our qualitative research, but that's the point of her book. And I think she sums it up really well. Now, Rosaldo, with his headhunters things, the point, he gives all this data about what they do. They really do cut off each other's head. They cut off people's heads when they're upset. They really do. It's done a long time ago. Certainly on the train for that one. It's certainly compelling. But his point is about truth and objectivism, and the absolute and universal timeless has lost its monopoly status and now competes on a more nearly equal terms with truths and the case studies that are embedded in local interests and colored by local perceptions. So he ends with his theme that there is no such thing as impartial, objectivity, neutrality, impartiality, refer to the subject and positions once endowed with great institutional authority. but they are arguably neither more nor less valid than those of more engaged yet equally perceptive, knowledgeable social actors. And he, with his work, really changes the look of how anthropologists came into a community and understood their perception as being objective or impartial. And I think his work, back when he was writing it, really changed how we approached qualitative research, especially anthropology and across cultural studies. And that's how he ends his theme. That's his big deal. So I found this piece of some data on another paper. And it's kind of what I was talking about, that it has beautiful data. It has and even a good explanation, but that's the end of the paragraph. It doesn't go into the particular of one of the students, and it says how they based their perceptions, but there's not a particular quote explaining it. And then, of course, I'm looking for what was the big deal. Because this paper indicated that each interviewer had, or each person that was interviewed had 2 hours of recorded interviews. That's a lot of really good data that could tell a story and could really help us understand their perceptions. Not paraphrased and not even quantified, although quantifying is great. But what are we talking about? Where's the life in it? I want some kind of human experience to make this real, to breathe life into this. Go to another example. So this is the conclusion of a paper that I read. And it really is the very, very, very last paragraph. The early knowledge on factors influencing L2-WTC by entering a new foreign context may help EFL international students to understand how they could increase their L2-WTC, which leads to their L2 oral communication improvement. Well, oral communication improvement is a big deal. That's how we connect. That's how we're relevant. That's how we're in a global conversation. Those are all big deals. That is a big deal. Why? And this really is a conclusion to this paper. So now I want to know why. Plus, I want some real humans to tell me what the issue was and what changed them. So while the data is great, I think you could add to this conclusion by asking why it's a big deal or explaining why it's a big deal. What's its relevance in the human condition? And why did I want to read this story? Why did I get on this train? So I'm going to pause here again and to see about what your thoughts are on what a big deal in your qualitative research might be. Think of each piece of literature or data that you've collected. And, I'd love to hear somebody share with me what qualitative research they are doing, have done, would like to do, and why, what's the big deal? I would love to hear that.
All right, Jean, while you're waiting for answers, well, there were 2 questions in our chat room, but I don't want to ask them yet because you just asked a question. Let's see if anyone wants to share. So Jean's question is, do you have any qualitative stories, studies ongoing? Do you want to share? Is that it, Jean? Is it right? Does anyone want to share the big deal in their qualitative research?
Okay, I'll have a go. Looks like everybody's keeping quiet, so I'll have a go. So what's my big deal? My big deal is the fact that having found, I did a sort of a research with a school, a secondary school. They are 16-year-olds. The reason 16-year-olds, I'll say in a bit. And the topic is about entrepreneurial thinking for post-millennials. How do you foster that entrepreneurial thinking? So we did a research in a school of 16-year-olds in a secondary school in a Malaysian suburban area. Then what we did is with that data, and this is the big deal, it's that it is not about the competencies that we are looking at. It is the self-efficacy that they can be an entrepreneur if they want. So it is the entrepreneurial thinking that we are looking at, or I feel that is required. And the big deal is it's no point doing entrepreneurial studies at university level and I would say higher education process. It should start from young. So we can even start from the primary school where they can sell their, I would say, lemonade stands and things like that. But I think I focused on the secondary school because they're matured enough and yet they are able to think that they too could be an entrepreneur if they wanted to, but the entrepreneurial thinking as a competency is a different subset that we are looking at. So that's the big deal. Secondly is, the other big deal is, why should we do it in a pedagogy way of teaching them what entrepreneur is all about, when they can self-discover through an andragogy way, or even who knows, maybe heutagogy way, in which they can take ownership with regards to this. So that's my big deal. They taking ownership, having the self-efficacy. Over to you. Thank you.
That's very powerful. I would love to see that when that comes, when you have that written up. That is really powerful.
Thank you.
And why is that such a powerful thing to become an entrepreneur? There's so much. It's so powerful. It's a powerful way of being. Yeah.
So I'm not advocating the fact that all students should be an entrepreneur, but they should have the entrepreneur mindset. Because if they are going to work in a multinational company or a big organization, they should have the intrapreneur kind of attitude or disposition to make sure that they are able to, meet the demands of the VUCA world. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's my big deal.
Well, that is a big deal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to share? Otherwise,
yeah. So I would like to share my big deal. While I was conducting a critical discourse analysis of metaphoric construction by Pakistani politicians, political speeches. So my big deal was to identify the metaphorical construction where the politician was showing its identity, subjectivity, and criticizing the opposition party. So my big deal was to identify their metaphorical construction. What were the idioms, what were the metaphors, and from which context the politicians were constructing metaphors, the metaphoric construction from their political speeches. And identified every politician, government politician, the politician that was in power. So those politicians were always criticizing the opposition party, using certain idiomatic expression, using certain metaphors to degrade them and to identify or to boost up and to represent their own political party.
That's powerful, the use of rhetoric. And I think that's powerful for you to tell that story and give that, because I think the more that democratic citizens can understand that rhetoric that you are seeing and can
exactly. And ma'am, all the politicians were using power hegemony to hegemonize the other politicians, the opponent party.
Come and do that study in the United States. We need you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very powerful.
Because you are working on decolonization, so it would be a wonderful idea if we conduct that research in your states.
All about power, right? How we establish it, how we hold on to
Thank
it,
you.
let it go.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. Yeah, I have one question related to triangulation. So my question is, what is role of subjectivity in putting many voices together?
Oh, that,
Researcher subjectivity.
yeah, subjectivity. And in qualitative research, I think that's really important to address. Of course, Lincoln and Guba have a lot. There's a lot of stuff written about truth with a capital T versus truth that's in all those foreign cultures and truth. I think that when you have a variety of voices, what I'm really going for is trustworthiness instead of the word validity. Because trustworthiness means, as a researcher, I gave my effort to best represent all of my participants. And that by putting many voices together, then you're weaving something that is more collective. And that's subjectivity. And subjectivity is a difficult animal to work with when you're doing qualitative research. And because of that, I think there's extra importance of having multiple voices. I think it's also really important for the researcher to understand and to be clear that they're the ones at the keyboard typing it, and that I realize that I can only work with my lens, that I am permanently bound to who I am, you know, white American woman with a PhD. And I have to, I think, when I put that out somewhere in the introduction, discuss that my positionality is this is the lens that I'm looking through, and then giving my best effort to have a multiple voices, multitude of voices.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Perfect. Shortcut. Yeah, okay, you did that. But we have one more question here. But before I ask that, could you leave your email addresses here in our chat room so that after we have uploaded the video, the recording on YouTube, we will share it with you, okay, to those email addresses. The question, Gene, what was the question? Well, one of the questions was Shafkat's question, and he asked it, make my job easy. The other one was,
how much data can be put, is that one?
yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, you made my job even easier.
How much data can be placed as examples in the chapter or results or discussion? Do we choose the best example and put it in? Yes. So how much data, of course, depends, you know, it's your story. So what makes the point? Enough to make your point and not be redundant. And, you know, I have been researching for, I don't know, 7 years for this book. So I have hours and hours and hours of tapes and pages and pages and pages of transcripts, and probably one of 100 utterances will make it in. And what I base that on is what is most representative. Well, kind of both. I mean, you have your common, but then also you have your frame of the outside, making that nice border. So some of those quotes that are not main and contrasting them, and of course noting that those were the frame, those were the outliers, not the common. Something I've done is that Wordle app. I don't know if you guys have that, where you can dump in text and then the word that is used the most is the biggest. It makes a very pretty little picture. I don't know if you guys use that or not. I've used that a lot when I'm trying to, and that might also answer the subjectivity, when I'm trying to represent my data and represent a common theme, and then I can see words that come up a lot, and then that's that's a way of me to know that that word means something. And of course, Freire did that without Wordle. He did it by tallying his words, but I think that's really important. And then when you hear a word a lot, to really delve into what that word means to your community as opposed to what that word means to you, because of course semantics, so especially cross-culturally, semantics is, that's a tricky game.
Great. Thanks, Jean, for the answer. Well, it's a really tricky question. How much of data to put in? You know,
Yeah.
my view would be try to be minimal, because usually it looks like the student or the author has done data there without even thinking about them. They will look much like raw data rather than something criticized, reflected on, and analyzed.
And the question he's always asking is this data telling me the same story that I just told? That data, yes, I want enough of a sampling so that the reader is clear that there are many voices saying the same thing. But after 3, do I really need 30 to say the same thing? So if it's redundant and I'm telling it again and again, it gets, gets to be like that person that's at the party that tells the same story over and over.
And another question, Jean, if I didn't get enough information I want during the 2-hour interview, does it mean I need to go back to my participant all the time?
Yeah, for me it does, if I can. I can go back, and I've gotten better at saying, tell me more about this, instead of being direct, and really trying to make sure that the interviews are more conversational. I have a list of questions that guides the flow of the conversation. I will tell you one of, speaking of small moments that are transformational, when I first started this process of researching, I had labored over these questions, which I still do because I want good questions. But I typed them and put them, right with my IRB forms for everybody, and got everything going and got the order set up and everything. And you guys don't know me, but I do have to tell you that I'm a little scattered. I'm not that organized. That's just, you know that. And of course, the paper that had all the questions was missing and it was gone. And so I had to wing it. And I had been doing it for about a year, 2 years maybe. And it was the best interview I'd had for the last 2 years. And it told me to let go of that little piece of paper with all the questions on it. Yes, write the paper. Yes, know what you're going for. Have a roadmap in your head, be clear. But when you're actually sitting in front of your participant, put the paper away. And that's the last time I ever had the paper in front of me. Again, I still spend a lot of time figuring out the questions, but once I'm sitting down with my participant, or I call them colleagues now, so that it's a little more egalitarian. Paper's gone, so I think that's important. I want to kind of close with Jerome Bruner, who I think he's really wise when he says that being able to go beyond that information is a gift of being a human being, that we can tell a story, and that you can take a lived experience and you can take lived experiences of others, even if you are putting some quantifiable thing in, like learning outcomes. What is really human is to be able to understand our experience, and how we understand our experiences, of course, is a story. I want to finish by telling you also that your data tells an important story. And I think that the world needs to hear your story. So one message I would have. I see lots of emails. What is the best way to tell a story or present data involving multiple stakeholders? That's really a great question. I want to kind of refer to the article that I just did about the Belize using radio. And there were so many to reach their learners, and there were so many stakeholders. Of course, there were the families that could not, they didn't have a device, certainly not internet, sometimes not even electricity. They needed to hear, they needed their kids educated. Then there were the teachers that wanted to reach their students. And then there was the Ministry of Education for Belize, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And then another stakeholder was the radio stations, and they gave up their advertising because they believed in education. And so because they had to give up their programming and advertising to broadcast school radio. So many stakeholders, and it was just such a joy to interview each group and hear their perspectives and to hear their passion and to hear what made it important and to hear teachers telling me that they were nervous but they did it, and to hear radios stations saying they were willing to give it up, and to hear the Ministry of Education say, no, we didn't know what to do, but this is the best we can do, and to talk to parents who said, yeah, actually Rachel comes down every day and listens. We're doing it. And there were so many stakeholders. So I felt it was really important to pull them all together and create, again, this story. Let's see, how to practice to find a better way to get to the big deal or the key point after analyzing your data. That's a good question. And especially if we're in grounded theory, we don't want to necessarily have the hypothesis right away of what our big deal is. You hope that it's grounded in your data. But I think whatever your data is telling you, I think you have to ask yourself, so what? So what if people are better at learning English because of this? So what? So what if politicians are using metaphors of power to hurt each other? So what? What does that tell us? And what does a democratic citizen glean from this? Why is it a big deal? Because now we understand power and we understand how people present power better. That makes us better consumers of our leaders and understanding their rhetoric. So I think it really is constantly asking, so what? Well, so what? Why is that important? Freire has lots. His name is Paulo Freire. His most famous one is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He also has a second one called Pedagogy of Hope. But his big work he did in something called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it's Paulo Freire. Okay. And Paulo Freire, it's 2006 is, by the way, his anniversary, the new edition. He wrote it in the 70s. So the 2006, just so you know, is the revised edition.
Great. Jean, you're a great presenter. You don't need a moderator. You're handling the questions yourself. Okay. We have about 11 minutes. We will be sharing the recording. Also, feel free to take a look at Jean's website, her project, School Adoption Project website. I'll set it up there, I'll share it again, and feel free to donate.
Yeah, that Belize Education Project, I'll give it a plug because I think that they have inspired me so much as an educator. So often, I don't know about your community, but my community bemoans the pandemic or misfortunes. And when I watch what these teachers do with no resources, no books, no pencils, no, let alone internet device or something like that to reach their kids, and their tireless passion to overcome any barrier to reach their kids is incredible. And so anything that you can help with in terms of monetary is really, it's really makes a huge difference. You'll really be impacting the lives of young kids that I think deserve to have education, and that you can lift their lives through literacy. And the monetary contribution that you can do from across the world contributes to being able to buy them something to read, some books and school supplies, pencils, stuff like that. So appreciate that.
Hello, hi, Dr. Jane. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Nurul. I'm doing ethnography research with a cultural group, a hunter and gatherers group in a forest in Malaysia. So my question is that I've been staying with them for about 1 year because I'm doing ethnography. So for the first 3 months, I face a language barrier challenge because they speak different language. So for the first 3 months, I focusedly did more on observations. And so my data was all about autoethnography based on my comprehension about their lifestyle. And another 10 to 11 months, my data focused more on their real conversations and interviews. So my story is like, if you can imagine a train. So the first 3 months, my autoethnography is like the first coach, and my interviews with them is like another coach. So how can I link these coaches to build a story? So that's my question.
What an exciting story. I'm on your train already. I think, honestly, when I think how I would start that story and start linking them, is a really vivid description of arriving at a place where you're not speaking their language, and the visual of it and the sound of their language to your ears before you could understand and decipher their words, and then start linking it together along with, as you come to understand. By the way, you're a quick learner of language if you're starting to understand them in 3 months. But wow, and also with that, I would really want their thoughts about who you were and their perceptions of you. I think that's really key. And linking it, who was this person that got off the train, literally or figuratively, and came into their community, and what did they think of you, and how did that change as you developed a relationship and got some more language proficiency? And start linking it as your story of coming to know them as well as their story of coming to you. And what I love about ethnography is that they've been changed by you, what you are coming to understand about who they are and their culture and their community is different than what it was before you came, because we can't help but influence each other, just like you're a different person after you have interacted with them. What a beautiful story you could have. Certainly, I think their perception of you could also help you in your ethnography in defining their community, because how they perceive you is going to define how you contrast with their community, better defining their community. What a great, I just wish I could read all of these. What a wonderful, wonderful ethnography.
Thank you, Dr. Jean.
Jane, are you reading that question too?
Let's see.
Yeah. Oh, it's a comment.
Yeah, okay.
It's like a comment. All right. By the way, we had an interview recently, Jean and I, and she's a wonderful writer. I think he answered just in a couple of hours. Someone sent me an email asking me for an interview last, I think 2 weeks ago, and I haven't even started. It's, I'm just the opposite. It takes a lot of time to, frame your mind. Anyway, if you're interested in reading the preprint of that interview, feel free to click on the link I just shared. Any more comments? We still have 5 minutes. The beauty of qualitative research is in its flexibility and openness and uh, its holistic nature. And these are the things we forget, especially when we keep focusing on the research questions or the methods that at the beginning we started our journey with. We got that question today that how do you triangulate, right? And then there was a comment on triangulation of methods. The way I see qualitative research is you may plan for interviews, perhaps semi-structured single session interviews, but then that may change. And you may start observing people. You may decide to have it multi-session. You may decide to, I don't know, perhaps even give that case, that human participant, some test to see what kind of people they are. I don't know. It's that these are the magic points about qualitative research that we don't have in quantitative research. Okay, any more questions? What you have been talking about, Jean, is really important. It is important because when I evaluate a thesis or when I evaluate a paper, the first thing I do is I take a look at the results. I don't look at anything else. I just look at the results. If the results look okay, synthesized, conventionally presented, then I'm confident about the quality of that paper or thesis. Otherwise, well, I will brace myself evaluating it. Thank you. Thank you very much for your thank yous. This was a great presentation. Within minutes, the house was full. And people were sending me messages for the recording, and also they were sending me messages to open up the room for more people. But I'm sorry, we didn't have enough chairs, only 100 chairs. Okay, Jean, is there anything else you'd like to?
No, what a wonderful opportunity to be with all of you, great thinkers. Love hearing
My
about
last question to you, sorry to interrupt. What's your big deal in this presentation?
my big deal in this presentation is that your data should tell a story, that you should be delivering information to the world in a way that we understand it in a story, because that's how human beings understand things. And so make it as a story, which was my last slide. Thanks for the question.
All right.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Young? Is there a question? No. Uh, okay, Jean, while you were talking, I also remembered something about the story of triangulation. You know, sometimes I publish something and then I keep thinking about it, or I submit something and I keep thinking about it. And of course, I get, you talked about peer feedback. I get peer feedback. That makes me think more. That makes me even go back to the participants and collect more data. So, what I'm saying is the whole journey is a process. Even after you have published your research, the process hasn't ended because it may lead to other journeys and other trains.
Yeah, I think so.
It never ends. The journey
I
never
found
ends.
that very true. Yeah.
Okay, we got one. Can Jean please share her own experience doing inter-rater coding? Ah, inter-rater coding.
And that is a really interesting piece. It's easier. I actually have a whole thing on focus groups because there you get that synergy of that inter-rater conversations. But in terms of inter-rater coding with my participants or with myself, I guess that's the question. Because if it's with myself, then that's kind of what you saw, the constant themes, the colors that are coming. And inter-rater coding or even reliability between participants is a little tricky because oftentimes, especially with the IRB, and that I am using a pseudonym, and they're sharing often very compelling, very personal, intimate stories that I don't want to share with anybody else, unless it's in, you know, in a way that I can protect them. But I still like to do some member checking and participatory checking to see if these stories resonate with the community. And oftentimes that sort of, I first do the inter-rater coding and then want to go see if that also resonates with others in the community. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. And, you know, speaking of qualitative research, we have different types of qualitative research. It could be, yeah, of course, in some part of it, you may have to rate something, but there are types of qualitative research you really don't worry about inter-rater reliability and including discourse analysis or
Narrative.
perhaps in moves analysis or
Yeah.
corpus analysis, but yeah, sometimes.
Yes, ma'am. After how many interviews you reached saturation points?
I'm sorry, can you say that question again? How many?
After how many interviews you reached saturation points of your studies?
Oh, that's a good question. So never. But then what is it Lincoln and Gouda say in theirs? At some point, it's time to start telling the story, knowing that it's not the complete story, always. So saturation for me is when I'm starting to hear the same thing again and again and again. And then I have a sense when I've listened to multiple stories and I'm hearing the same.
Yes.
Yeah, Shafkat, you asked a quantitatively qualitative question.
7.
7. I
Seven.
like that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
7.
but don't write it in your thesis, okay?
So when I'm hearing the same story multiple times, again and again, and I feel like I've gotten a lot.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Jean, the time is up. The time is up. I was thinking of inviting you for another talk because I think you're inspiring. What you're doing with your project is really inspiring, and I think we should have a talk by you. The whole talk should be about your project, if you agree.
I'd love that. Would be wonderful.
That would be great, yeah. So, but then we will not talk about research. We will just talk about, you know, giving and volunteerism and things like that. Yeah. So please agree to have that talk, and then we will have it this year, just after a few weeks, if you're available.
I would love that. That would be awesome.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. If you have any more questions, please go ahead. Thank you very much for your inspiring messages. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks, Jean. It means a lot, you know, you spent your weekend, and the most important part of it, the last bits of it. I'm so sorry. And thank you for sharing.
Joy. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
All right, so we will end the meeting. Shazwani, is there anything?
No, it's okay.
All right.
It's up to you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Jean, do you want to share how much has been donated so far?
Oh, I don't have access to it right now.
Oh, okay. All right. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. I
But
hope
I'll let you know.
I hope you receive $1 million or
hope
more. All right.
so much.
Okay. All right, dear
I'll get back to you.
participants, dear Jean, thank you very much. Thanks for your active participation. It was great.
Thank you very
answering
much.
questions.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Jane.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Dr.
so much,
Vahid.
Thank you
Dr.
very
Jean
much.
and Dr. Vahid. Thank you, everyone.